Great. Thank you so much, Niall. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this SDGs in Practice session on strategic foresight for sustainable development, future-proofing policy and partnerships. Today, we will take an in-depth look at two resources created by the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, UNDESA for short, that can help governments, academics, civil society representatives, and others better prepare for the future. My name is Ariel Alexevich. I'm a Sustainable Development Officer at UNDESA, and I'll be the moderator today. I'd like to thank my colleagues at UNITAR for helping make this session possible, and a big thanks to you for joining us from wherever you are in the world. So, as mentioned, today we'll look at two resources UNDESA offers for public use. First, we'll look at the World Population Prospects Report. That latest version came out last year, and that looks at predicted demographic changes all over the world, among other things that we'll get into. We'll also take a look at the World Economic Situation and Prospects 2025 report, which gives the UN's economic forecast in different regions and more, which my colleague will talk about later. And these, of course, are just two of the resources that UNDESA offers that can help you with your preparedness efforts as you make or discuss policies for the future. For a full look at what DESA has to offer on the topic of strategic foresight, we published this year a new review, The Future in Focus, Preparing for What Lies Ahead, review of DESA's foresight efforts. And this also has an interactive website you can check out to see what resources exist that you can use. My colleague Joshua is sharing the link for that in the Zoom chat, and he'll also be popping in other links to our reports throughout this event. So before we dive into it, just a few housekeeping tips before we begin. First, we do mean for this to be an interactive session. There's going to be about 15 minutes for Q&A after each report presentation, and your questions are important for us. And please use the Slido platform for asking your questions. There you can vote, you can enter your questions and vote up other people's questions as well. And on Slido, we'll also have a couple of audience polls, and you can find the questions and the polls by going to slido.com/future in focus, or go to slido.com and insert the hashtag future in focus, all in one word. So let's try Slido right now with a quick poll of you, our audience, with the question, what kind of foresight resources would be most useful to you? So again, go to slido.com and insert hashtag future in focus. Josh will pop the link to that in the chat right now as well. And then your options for voting are demographic projections, economic projections, databases of other stakeholders, databases of good practices, or would you prefer capacity building trainings or even something else? This just helps us in DESA know what kinds of offerings you're looking for, and it helps us plan for our future. So I will give you a few minutes to vote and get familiar with Slido. Again, go to slido.com, use the hashtag future in focus to take part. And while you're voting, we'll kick off our discussion of demographic data with an introductory video on the World Population Prospects Report. So please just bear with me for a moment as I load up this video and play it.
The world's population surpassed 8 billion a couple of years ago. Today it stands at 8.2 billion. My name is Sarah Hertog, and I am part of a team of demographers that every 2 years revises the world population prospects to get an updated sense of the size of the world's population and how we expect it to grow and change over the coming decades. One of the key findings from our new report is that we do expect that the size of the world's population is going to peak within the current century. We estimate that it will reach that peak of about 10.3 billion people sometime probably around the 2080s. We know that the population at its peak is going to be larger than it is today, and it's going to be much older than it is today. The age structure will have shifted to older ages. What that means for our societies and the implications for sustainable development hinge on how well we plan for that larger and older world population today and in the coming years. We know that there are some countries that are expected to double before the middle of the century in terms of population. They continue to have extremely high fertility and to grow at a very fast rate. The challenge in these countries is to meet the needs of that growing population, to make sure that children have access to education and healthcare, that women and men have access to sexual and reproductive health, that there's jobs to absorb the large numbers of young people who are entering the workforce. In other countries where population is aging very rapidly or declining, there are economic challenges associated with that. There are social challenges. We need policies to ensure that people have what they need and that no one is left behind. The three components of population change are fertility, the number of births, mortality, the number of deaths, and then at the country level, net international migration. Of course, at the global level, net international migration is equal to zero. The life expectancy at birth at the global level is about 73 years today, and that is an increase of more than 8 years since 1995. This is remarkable. This is one of the greatest achievements of humanity ever. We've seen just generally improvements in survival, reductions in mortality, and we expect that by the end of the century, the life expectancy could exceed 81 years. Today, at the global level, the total fertility rate is about 2.2 children per woman, and that's almost one child per woman less than it was in 1990. 2.1 children per woman is the replacement rate, which is the level of total fertility in order for the population size to stabilize in the absence of any net international migration. Population trends are integrally related to gender equality. In many parts of the world where fertility remains very high and the population is growing, women are having more children than they say that they want. When women have an education, when they have access to the tools and resources, information, and family planning that they need to make decisions about the number, timing, and spacing of their children, that we see fertility fall. Where fertility is very low and populations are declining, what we see is a lot of women are having fewer children than they say that they want. And I think gender equality is at the heart of that as well. There are all kinds of constraints, things like work-life balance, the need to do care work for aging parents, the high cost of housing and education, inequality in the division of labor within the household. And so just as achieving gender equality is essential to ensuring that women in high fertility countries are able to have the families that they want, so too in low fertility countries. At the country level, migration can have quite a large impact, especially on the trajectory of the future population. It's not predictable in the same way that fertility and mortality are. It depends on demographic factors, it depends on the economic context, and it depends on the political situation. For a number of countries, those that are declining in population size, net migration may be a way to bolster the population size going forward. Since the middle of the last century, when the population was growing at its most rapid rate at more than 2% per year, there have been really dire warnings about the capacity of our planet to absorb growing numbers of people and meet their needs. In truth, some of the most dire warnings have not come to pass. Technologies have improved, and we've been able to provide food, shelter, water for growing numbers of population, more than we ever anticipated that we would need. It's really up to us and up to our governments and our policymakers to prepare us and begin planning now to meet the needs of a growing number of people while ensuring a sustainable future for our planet.
All right, so you've gotten this introduction to our World Population Prospects Report. So we have a little bit of background, but let me just check in on our poll quickly to find out what kind of data and offerings would be most helpful for you. This is, of course, good for us to know in DESA for future planning. I see we have more than 20 votes here, with about 29% of people asking for capacity building trainings. Second demographic projections with about 24% and economic projections 19%. So it seems like you guys are in the right place to learn about our demographic and economic offerings. So let's move right on into our first presentation. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Thomas Sporenberg, a Population Affairs Officer at UNDESA. Good morning, Thomas. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. Hello, everyone.
Morning. And just before I hand the floor, I'd like to remind our audience that they can be asking questions about WPP for Thomas via the Slido platform at slido.com, #futureinfocus. So Thomas, if you're all set, please, over to you.
Yes, let me share my screen. Here we go. Confirm you can see.
Yes, we can.
Wait, I'm lost now. I have oh yeah, I'm not familiar with Teams. Oh, with the Zoom. Sorry, here we go.
No problem.
I don't see any more my present. Do you see my presentation in full screen?
We see it. Oh, yes, now it is in presentation mode.
And not anymore now.
Not anymore.
Oh, it means I cannot access my at the same time. Ah, okay, now let me see one more thing. If I is there a way to, sorry about that little glitch. I cannot access my note at the same time if I put full screen because it takes my whole screen. Would you be able, if I send that to you quickly through
Sure.
Teams? Can you
Sure.
do that for me? Sorry everyone about that.
No problem. We're all here to learn, and so we're learning
Yeah.
our digital tools as well.
I send, yeah, I send that through Teams, so it must be able to.
Yep, I got
Yeah.
it. One moment.
So you will be sharing, right?
Yes, I'll share
Okay.
in just a minute.
Right, sorry.
It's okay. Just downloading here.
Yeah. Great. Yeah.
Okay, does it look like presentation mode?
Yeah, we have the next slide coming. I think you need to switch that in the display setting at the top.
I have no idea how to do that.
At the top of your screen, you have display setting. We see that on.
Sorry, I don't see where it says display setting.
Okay, okay, never mind. Let's keep it then this way. If you go above with your cursor, I can see your cursor moving.
Yes, chat, share, pause.
Okay, never mind. Let's go in this way then.
Okay.
So thank you. So what I wanted to present to you today is a quick overview of one of UNDESA flagship products, which is the World Population Prospect. We have had a nice video from my colleague Sarah that introduced briefly the World Population Prospect data and some key trends. What I would like to do now in 15 minutes or so, and it's quite challenging, is to present give an overview only of the world population prospects. And if you have more specific questions, we can address them during the Q&A session. So let's start. If we have the second slide. So in the report, Shaping the Trends of Our Time, published 5 years ago at the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, the demographic trends were identified as one of the most significant transformation of our time for individuals, societies, and the world at large. So the demographic shifts are therefore one of the most important megatrends defining progress towards the SDGs. They act as a backdrop against which every development action or every change in the assessment of SDG will take place. It is therefore important to have demographic data and projections that can help to assess progress and achievements towards the SDGs. And the World Population Prospect provides such a source of authoritative data at the global, regional, and national level. So if we move to the next slide, and we will see what is the World Population Prospect. So the World Population Prospect, or WPP for its acronym, is the population division of UNDESA flagship report. It is the official estimate and projection of the United Nations for populations and key demographic indicators such as fertility, mortality, and migration, and these by single age and sex. And these data are available on the annual basis. We used to have 5-year period. Since 2022, we have now annual basis. So WPP covers 237 countries and areas and provides aggregate for more than 300 groups, such as geographic region, economic or income groups, political groups, etc. We also have some, we used to have a river basin groups, population for river basins. WPP is published every 2 years, usually on World Population Day, which is July 11. And the latest available revision of WPP is the 2024 revision that was released in July last year. Sorry. We will soon start working on the next revision. Can move to the next slide, please. So the 2024 revision of the World Population Prospect is based on population and demographic rates based on empirical observation assembled for the period from 1950 to 2024 for each of the 237 countries and areas. My colleagues and I, we use data for almost 2,000 population and housing censuses, more than 3,000 surveys, such as the demographic and health surveys, the multiple indicator cluster survey, the world fertility surveys. We use also vital registration system data from vital registration system from 169 countries and areas, as well as official statistics that were provided to the UN statistic division through the UN demographic yearbook. And as well, we use global and regional database, such if you are familiar with some of them, such as the Human Mortality Database or the Human Fertility Database or OECD database. And we use also public micro data sets. So why we need, and we can go to the next slide. Why do we have the UPP while every country has data or provide data? First of all is because not all countries have data for all the years and for all the indicators. So WPP needs to use modeling to reconstruct the population from 1950 up to the present, and then to project to 2100. To do that, we will use both deterministic and probabilistic models to estimate and project the components of demographic change. So if you remember the video, we have the fertility, the mortality, and the migration. So these models are necessary because there may be discrepancies between estimates from different empirical data sources, and there are also often gaps in the historical estimates for some indicators. And the probabilistic model, we use that mostly for the projections, and it gives us a sense of uncertainty, and this is important when we project in the future. If we can go to the next slide. So to illustrate the need for modeling, let's look to a quick example. This is a figure for the total fertility rate in India, which is the average number of births per woman. The figure is from 1950 up to 2100, and it shows in color, it shows different estimates of total fertility rate that are based on different data sources and estimation methods. So you see the difference between the red lines and the blue, or the light blue or the green. Those are estimates of total fertility, and they return very different level of of the average number of children per woman. So based on this cloud of point, we use the model to derive we use modeling, sorry, to derive a consistent series of level and trends in fertility that will be used to reconstruct the population of India by age and sex, starting from 1950 up to today, and then we project using the projection. The projection period is starting in 2024. And we show the figure shows the light blue shaded area. This is the 95% prediction interval, and the dotted line in the middle is the median value of the projection, which serves as the most likely scenario, or the one that is usually used by most stakeholders. This is an example only of the total fertility rate, but we use similar approach for the age-specific fertility rate, as well as for child and adult mortality. We can have the next slide, please. So WPP provides a set of population and demographic estimates and projections that covers 150 years, from 1950 to 2100. And those estimates and projections are internally accurate and consistent, and that they can serve to monitor and track progress toward the SDGs. A large number of SDG targets are population-based and use, therefore, WPP data. So demographic change that are happening in the population are key. Whether a population grow, decline, or move will influence the SDGs. So let's look now at one of the most important demographic trends that serves as backdrop for the SDGs, and we can move to the next slide. And if you remember the video, Sarah started the video with this. This figure shows the trend in the global population from 1950 to 2100. As of mid-2025, July 2025, the world's population is a bit larger than 8.2 billion. It's a significant increase compared to 1950, when the global population reached 2.5 billion. Now, the growth is projected to continue over the coming decades, and the global population is projected to reach 10.3 billion by the mid-2080s, and possibly decline after that to 10.2 billion by the end of the century in 2100. The further we go into the future, the more uncertain the projection become. That's shown by the yellow and the red line you have on the figures. However, there is a fairly strong consensus among the institutions that produce global population projection. This is the UN, the Institute for Arithmetic in Seattle, and the International Institute for Applied System Analysis in Vienna. All three institutions, we agree that to say that the global population will continue to grow at least until the middle of the century. What comes after, it depends a lot on the assumption that the institution are making. But this trend at the global level masks diversity at the regional or country level. If we go to the next slide. So in some regions, the population has already peaked, while in other, the population will peak by the middle of the century, or it will peak only later. So the population of 63 countries, representing 28% of the world population, has already peaked. This is the orange line and orange text on the slide. In 48 countries, which are indicated here in light blue, representing 10% of the world population, are likely to see their population peak by the mid of the century. And the remaining 126 countries, which represent 62% of the world population, are likely to see their population peak only after the mid of the century. So the population growth that is projected at the global level, that was shown in the previous slide, will greatly be influenced only by one group of countries, the one where the population will continue to grow after the mid of the century, which is the purple figure indicated here. If we move to the next slide, we can also see that WPP shows that we have distinct regional and national population trends that are driven by different demographic components. In the group where the population has already peaked and the group where the population is projected to peak before the middle of the century, low fertility is the main component explaining the change in the population. In contrast, in the group of country where the population will continue to grow after the mid-century, the population age structure, or what demographers call the population momentum, will be the main driver of population change. This is due to past demographic trends, especially past high fertility, that will continue to drive population growth even after fertility has declined. So the growth in the world population and the growth in the country that will continue growing, even if fertility goes to the replacement level, the population will continue to grow because of the growth that is inscribed in their population structure. In other words, most of the future growth of the global population will be due to the momentum that is created by growth in the past. So these differences in the contribution of the demographic components to population change have important implications for the demographic shifts. And if we go to the next slide, this slide I show distinct trends in three broad age groups. We have the population under age 20, the population age 20, 64, and the population age 65 or older. At the global level, which is the first panel on the left, the number of persons aged 65 or older will outnumber the youth population by 2080. This bears major implications for social support systems, such as health systems, pension schemes, social protection coverage, etc. In the countries where the population has already peaked, which is the upper right panel, or in the countries where the population will peak before mid-century, the number of persons aged 65 or older is expected to soon exceed the youth population. In contrast, in the lower right panel, the countries that will continue to grow after the mid-century, the number of persons aged 65 or older is not projected to exceed the youth population before the end of the century, even if the youth population is projected to stabilize. In many developing countries, which are falling in the group of countries that will continue to grow, the working age population, indicated here in orange, is projected to increase substantially. Such an increase offers a window of opportunity for investing in education, employment, and various social support systems. This is a one-time opportunity that should be seized. So the trends that are illustrated here over the rest of the century have important implications for development. Whether a country experiences an increase in the number and proportion of older people, or whether it faces challenges of an ever-growing young population, the social, economic, or environmental challenges are very different. Based on the specific circumstances and priorities of each country, population stabilization or a limited population decline may bring additional opportunities to eradicate poverty, expand access to healthcare and education, promote gender equality, improve social system, move towards more sustainable pattern of production and consumption, or enact measures to protect the environment and mitigate the negative effect of climate change. In contrast, in countries with youthful population, substantial investment in education, healthcare infrastructure, along with reforms to promote the creation of opportunity for decent work and to improve the transparency and efficiency of government institutions, are needed to ensure that the time-bound opportunity of the demographic window is not wasted. If we go to the next slide, and almost to conclude, WPP is the authoritative source for population trends that supports the monitoring and achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. These data are freely available and regularly updated. I have given only a very quick overview of one trend in a major trend that are serving as backdrop for the SDG. There are many others that I could not touch upon here. And WPP is used widely by various actors, both involved with the SDG and outside. for which I list here only a few examples. And finally, if we go to the last slide, WPP is accessible on the internet at the following website location. You have here the address, where you can access various resources and download WPP data in various options. You can find also technical documentation explaining the methods used to produce WPP population estimates and projections, as well as various metadata information, such as the empirical data sources used to produce WPP, and also, that are also available on the same website. And with that, I will conclude by thanking you for your attention and for your question that may follow. Thank you. You are muted, Arjan.
Thank you. Thank you, Thomas, for sharing ways that stakeholders can use this report and for providing more of an overview of what this can do for stakeholders. I want to, before we get to the audience questions, I want to hand the floor over to one of those stakeholders. We are fortunate to have with us Conrad Hackett, the Associate Director of Research and a Senior Demographer at Pew Research Center. Conrad, are you there?
Yes.
Great. So Conrad, over to you for the view of how you use this report.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. Let's see if I can share some slides here. Oh, where did it go? Sorry about this. Okay, here we go. So at Pew Research Center, we are power users of WPP data. We are so grateful to have it. And I just wanted to quickly mention two ways that we use the data. The first is very straightforward. We report directly on our analysis of WPP data. And on the right of the screen is a short blog post we put out earlier this month on World Population Day about 5 facts on how the world's population is changing. And then perhaps the more unique and interesting thing that my team at Pew does is we produce reports about the religious demography of the world. And to do so, we combine country level data from the UN, information about population size, age structure, and fertility, with information that we get from other sources, the same sources that are used to construct the WPP, that we're using the religion variables that aren't a component of the WPP itself to produce these religion reports. And last month, we put out a report about how the religious composition of every country changed over a 10-year period. In the past, some of the other kinds of reports we've put out have looked at educational attainment by religion, living arrangements by religion, and most recently a report about the religious composition of the world's migrants. And it's so important to have the standardized data from the UN to be the foundation of all these reports. Currently, we're working on an update of our previous work on religion population projections. And so the UN's projections, for example, of future fertility rates in every country are a huge component of this work. And it's such a pleasure not to have to replicate the important and unwieldy work that the UN team does to produce those estimates. So we're very grateful. Thank you very much.
Again, thank you so much, Conrad, for that. Appreciate your perspective. And maybe, Conrad, you could just hang out a bit in case any of these upcoming questions are more for you than for Thomas. But I do want to take a look at what we have on Slido here. Let's see, I think we have a question from Journey who asks, how can WPP help build youth capacity and demographic analysis and engage them in local population projections for SDG implementation? So, Thomas, any views on how youth can use this?
Youth,
Yeah.
It's not particular on youth, but for everyone, we have online the report, the methodological report that details the method we use. So I would invite people that are interested in learning more of consulting those and to understand the method we apply. Many of the method we apply are available in R. So there are modules and there are codes that you can use and find in R, and you can apply that yourself. So we made a large effort to have replicable results. So that's another option. And then if at the national level, if statistics office needs support, they can always contact us at DESA and ask for technical mission or technical assistance on specific topic. One of my colleagues went recently 2 weeks in Uganda because they wanted to work on national population and also subnational population. So there was a 2-week training to sit with the national officers and to apply the method, give illustration and comment results. So that will be my answer. It's not specifically for youth, young people, but that applies to everyone. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure you would encourage youth to become demographers
Yes, of
themselves.
course.
Of course, there's a
And
growing.
we have also internship. There are internship available in DESA. Those internship used to be only in person. We have a possibility of remote internship. So it opens also, it gives opportunity to people that previously could not come in person to work or to gain experience with the UN. So there are ways and channels that young people can come and gain experience and be exposed to our work.
Great. Thank you, Thomas. And I will note when you guys, if you're interested, all of the internships, they're on the Inspira website, inspira.un.org, if you're interested in taking a look at what internships are out there. Great. Thank you. So here's another question about, can you say more about how this population data is used in SDG accountability?
SDG, I don't quite understand SDG accountability, but many indicator for many targets use population as a denominator. And when the any population data that need to be used within the UN will be using WPP data. So WPP is somehow, that's why I had this quote, I think 107 out of 160 targets are influenced by population, I call the growth, decline or move. So that's where the WPP data are influencing or somehow the SDG. Yeah, because we can have progress in the numerator, but if the denominator goes in the opposite direction, then we may have different results at the end. So yeah, that's why the population data is one key behind the scene of all SDG target or many SDG targets.
Okay, great. Thank you. And here's a question that says, maybe this is for Conrad, actually. It says, thanks, Conrad. Is religious affiliation determined by self-identification or on country level? And do you have any data on the importance of religious beliefs?
Thanks. Yes, we use census and survey data that measures individual religious identity for all of our reports. And separately at Pew Research, we do surveys measuring the importance of religious beliefs, and we have reports on that topic at pewresearch.org.
Perfect. Thank you. And let's see, we have here for Thomas a question. What is the significant parameter which most influences population decrease?
The fertility, level of fertility in the long run. Then we have also, for some countries, can be the immigration. Some countries, if you think of Eastern European countries, we have large share of the population that leave the country. So it furthers impact the decline, the population decline. So both low fertility and immigration, people leaving, are the most the most important component for population decline.
Yeah, great.
And then at some point, when you have for long-term low fertility, there is also a negative momentum in the population. It becomes a bit technical, but you have the structure of the population is not conducive to growth. So we have also that in the long run.
All right, thank you. Another one here that just came in. How can you use world population data to plan for housing or food shortages?
So it will world population prospect or WPP data are national data. So for housing, it will not give you a lot of information on the distribution of the population in space or across the country. For that, we have another set of data, which is called the World Urbanization Prospect. And this will give you information on where population live, the size of the city, which size of the city, which city size are growing faster or declining. And we are now working on the release of the next World Urbanization Prospect, hopefully later this year. And this will give you more information. For food, except the location of the population through the World Urbanization Prospect, this data will not give you a lot of information for food consumption. You will need to cross that with FAO data and estimates. Yeah.
Yes, and so thanks for bringing up the World Urbanization Prospects report. There's another question here about how can urban planners use population projections to anticipate infrastructure and service needs in rapidly growing cities? So is that something WPP touches on, or they should wait for the urbanization report?
They should wait for the urbanization report. WPP is only national population by age and sex. There is no information where people live except within national border. So we cannot tell with WPP data anything about urbanization or planning, urban planning. With the World Urbanization Prospect, which will come later this year, we match that with the population data from WPP, and then we can tell where the growth will be in the future.
Sounds good. And next, what indicators in WPP are most relevant for evaluating social protection coverage, maternal health, or gender equality?
So for maternal health, all right, we would have for health or gender, we have data on mortality by sex and age. So we can compare the mortality profile or the death rate for different age groups. So it can give us an idea if women are on par with men or the opposite. We can track progress. In the past, we collaborate with UNICEF, the World Bank, and WHO in the UN IGME, which is an interagency group for child mortality estimation, where we also have child mortality, and then we divide that by neonatal and infant or juvenile under 5 mortality. And then we have also some work on the cause of mortality, but this is beyond WPP. In terms of WPP, you can use the mortality data because WPP is only pure demography, fertility, mortality, and migration. So we don't have health per se, but you can proxy health through mortality. That would be my answer.
Okay, sounds good. Let's see. And then here is one. It calls you out. It says, Thomas, do you have any evidence of political instrumentalization of demographic data? And if so, how do you control for that?
So that's exactly why we work on WPP, because many countries publish data willingly biased. Some correct their data, some don't. Some pretend they know better than what their data says and they want a specific value. But we always stick to our guns, let's say, to our data. And the power of WPP is that we start in 1950 and we reconstruct the population based on the parameter we estimate or we model. And then we try to match and reproduce every census or official data. For some census, in some countries, we can match that perfectly with the data we have. For others, it's impossible. Why? Because in many countries, censuses are not perfect. Censuses tend to miss some group in the population. Very often you have children that are under-enumerated. In some countries, the children can be under-enumerated by 10, up to 10 or 20%, so this can be very substantial. And because we track cohorts through times, we can redress, WPP can kind of redress those missing kids. And this is something we try to advocate, we try to explain to countries repeatedly through mission, through technical meetings and so on. And it's not always, it doesn't go through always, very often because we have turnover in the national administration. So the political view, I will give one anecdote, and I had this personal, it's personal to me. Like for years, I was working on Myanmar, doing the estimates and projection for Myanmar. And the WPP, we were telling that Myanmar was around 50 to 52 million people up to around 2010, 2014. Myanmar didn't have a census since 1983. So all official data from Myanmar were coming from population projection from the national authorities. Those projections were telling that the country was 62 million or more. So it was a gap of 10 million, which is huge on a population of 50 million. So every other year when we publish our data, we had a complaint from the national authorities, from the team, the World Bank team in the countries, and we had the inquiries from other corporations in China and Japan who wanted to invest in the country. They wanted to understand why such a difference. In 2014, the country finally conducted a census. And the census came, the result came, and the preliminary census, I think, put the population of the country at 51.2 million. And simply the population projection were not updated regularly. So they did in 1983, and they've completely forgotten about the international migration. So they assumed nobody was leaving Myanmar. Because of that, we ended up with a 10 million difference in 2014. So it's not exactly politically motivated, but the country was claiming something, and we're like, no, it's impossible based on the evidence. We know what is happening in neighboring countries. It's impossible. You have so many people in your country. So that's one example. We had also sometimes delegation coming and asking for very specific values. They say we want this because we want to show the good that our president is doing in our country. And they were like, well, show us the evidence. And very often they cannot come with evidence. So the WPP value stays and remain.
Thank you for
A bit
that.
long, sorry.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the example as well. I wonder if I could actually ask Conrad to come in and maybe say something about how Pew deals with any sort of politicalization of data, or if you're looking towards our data as the standard of reducing that as much as possible. Over to you, Conrad.
We also definitely run into actors who would like data to tell a different story, and like the good folks at the UN, we are just trying to be faithful to the data and aware of any possible biases in the data.
Yeah, great, thank you. It's thank you for the good work you guys are both doing on that
Just
issue.
to add one thing, it's better that we don't know about the implication of our data, because those data, for example, are used also in the graduation of country when they want to change categories. income categories and all of that. Not income, sorry, but the graduation to change development categories. And it's better we don't know what's going on, so we have a kind of independent judgment, and we are not influenced by these potential implications.
Great, thank you. I think we just have time for one more question here. Is there a projection for a shift towards greater migration to African countries in the coming decades? And I know there's also our population division puts out some migration data separately. Maybe Thomas, you could touch on.
Yes, we have a different data set, which is on international migration stocks. International migration is the most difficult component to project, simply because it depends so much on political will. If a country decides to close its border, Hungary did that a few years ago. They decided to close border, and that was it. It's very difficult to predict. It's almost impossible. So we have, for the first time, the past revision, we had kind of a Bayesian or probabilistic projection for migration, but we have very large prediction interval because it's very complex and it can swing positive to negative. So yeah, it's very volatile.
Great. Well, stay tuned for that, everybody, the next time that migration data comes out. But for now, we'll have to get to our next report. So just a big thank you again to Thomas.
Thank you for having us.
And to Conrad for sharing your views and experiences of how you use data and collect this data. So we really appreciate it. Great. So colleagues, before we move to our second report, we'll do another audience poll, again on Slido. You can go to slido.com and use hashtag future in focus. This time, let me ask you, how much are you considering foresight and preparedness in your work compared to 1 year ago? So it's a quick poll. Your options are much more, a little more, about the same, a little less, and a lot less. So while you are voting, I will share with you a video showcasing some of the positive outcomes of the recent Financing for Development conference that concluded earlier this month in Sevilla, Spain. In the context of Foresight, UN member states and other stakeholders work to prioritize investments today that will be resilient and relevant tomorrow. If you are looking for more information about how DESA is working on Foresight in the context of financing, that again is in our Future in Focus report here. But one moment, and I will just play that video for everyone.
Three ways the finance.
Sorry.
The Financing for Development conference made a difference. First, the world worked together. At this time of great geopolitical divides, over 190 countries negotiated and agreed on an outcome document called the Sevilla Commitment, which lays out important steps to boost investment in sustainable development, tackle the debt crisis that is burdening so many of the poorest countries, and give developing countries a stronger voice in the international financial system. Second, it was not just talk, but action. Over 130 initiatives were launched here in Sevilla this week, from supporting small-scale farmers to investing in clean energy to funding health and education. These concrete steps are delivered to make a difference in people's lives, especially those in the poorest and most vulnerable countries. Third, it was not just governments and NGOs, but also the private sector. About 2,000 private sector representatives were here in Sevilla, helping to mobilize the private capital needed to fill the $4 trillion gap in funding for the Sustainable Development Goals and finance our common future.
All right. Great. So let's see how you voted on how much are you considering foresight and preparedness in your work compared to 1 year ago. We have, again, more than 20 votes, with 43% saying much more, 39% saying a little more. So I think that's why we're all here having this event today, is to think about foresight and expand a little bit what we consider to be foresight and how tools we have now can help us prepare for the future. So with that, let's turn now to economic forecasting. And please welcome my colleague, Sebastian Vergara, an Economics Affairs Officer at UNDESA. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Ariel. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk about all these important topics.
Yes, and Sebastian, you're going to tell us about the World Economic Situation and Prospects 2025. This is another one of DESA's flagship reports, this one all about our economic projections. So Sebastian, over to you.
Thank you, Ariel. Let me share here my presentation. Can you see it?
Yes, we see it. It's not in presentation mode yet.
Let me see if
Yes.
maybe yes. Excellent. Great.
Perfect.
Thank you. So yes, I'm going to present this UNDESA report, World Economic Situation and Prospect as of mid-2025. This is an annual report that we launch every January, and we make also every year an update. We produce an update by mid of the year, and in late May we produce this report. I think we all agree that we are living in a very turbulent times, from political, from economic, from social, technological perspective, you name it. So understanding what all this means for the economic situation and for the prospects of the economic situation of countries and region is very much needed. Also, I mean, to navigate, of course, this time, but also to implement better policies and to make progress towards the sustainable development goals. In this report, we analyze, of course, the global economic situation and prospect. We also provide analysis at different regions, at the regional level, and also country forecast. So we talk about growth, unemployment, inflation, trade, investment, all the economic aspects, that impact on the economic situation. And very importantly, and I want to reemphasize to emphasize this, in this report we try to make the connection of what all this means to the SDGs. There are other reports that also analyze, from the IMF, from the World Bank, that also analyze economic situations, but they mostly stay in the economic area. We try to connect all what this means to what are the development implications and the sustainable development goals. In our latest report that was launched, as I said, in May, our message was very, I would say, sobering. Growth is slowing. Uncertainty is very high, and the risk, and this is very important, to development and to the sustainable development goals are mounting. As you can see in the figure, economic growth at the global level was 2.9% in 2024, and we project for this 2025 to be only 2.4%. Let me put this a little bit in context. Between 2010 and 2019, economic growth at the global level was on average 3.2%. And for this year, we expect 2.4, which is, of course, an important difference that has major implications for living standards. What we observe, of course, and we all have been seeing the news and what's going on, there has been an escalation of the global trade tensions. The United States have imposed a myriad of new tariffs. And also there is a lot of uncertainty that applies not only to what are the policies, but also on what are the impacts of these policies in the short and the medium term. In the report, we basically made a broad-based downward growth revisions in comparison to what were our projections in terms of economic activity in January when we launched the main report. So in May, when we produced the update, there was broad-based downward revisions in terms of economic activity. And this, of course, subdued global growth and the subdued global outlook for what is coming, of course, is having and will have important implications for the Sustainable Development Goals. Very quickly, I want to talk about different regions. The economic prospects in developed economies was revised downward. This reflects different aspects. In the case of the US, for example, the policy uncertainty that we have observed in recent months and how tariffs can impact investment and consumption will affect economic activity. For the United States in particular, the growth for 2025, now we expect a 1.6% in 2025, which is well below what was last year, 2.8%. In the European Union, also, economic growth will remain about 1%, which is low. And this is basically related to lower export growth and also because of some structural challenges and slow productivity growth that we have been observing. So, of course, this also provides a context with the slow growth in the major economies, United States, European Union, the same for the case of Japan. Of course, there is a bias towards a relatively subdued economic growth prospects in the global economy. And this affects, of course, developing countries. In terms of developing economies, we see a very diverse pictures in terms of the growth prospects, but overall the growth remains slow. That is very clear and is an important message. And just one number to highlight that. And decade between 2010 and 2019, the average growth for the developing countries as a whole group was 5.2%. Now, for this year, 2025, we expect only 4%. So this is a 1.2 difference that, of course, is very important. In Africa, we observe, just to give you some flavor of different regions, in Africa, a lot of uncertainty from the trade tensions is affecting the growth of exports. And also many countries are facing rising fiscal challenges, facing fiscal risks. Some countries are even facing fiscal crisis and debt crisis that are having important development implication. In Latin America, WIC remains very low in comparison to historical standards, and that has been the case for the last decade. So Latin America in particular is facing very challenging times because there is a structural question of why economic growth is so slow, why investment is so low. And this is, as I mentioned, not only a cyclical or a short-term phenomena, but it has some structural components. And as you see in the chart, we observe in comparison to the forecast that we made in January, in our latest forecast in May, we downgraded also the economic growth for 2025 across all the developing regions, in Western Asia particularly, but also very notable downward revisions in Latin America and South Asia, because of course what I mentioned previously, the trade uncertainty, the slower growth in the developed countries, etc. Of course, there are some bright spots, particularly some countries in Asia, East Asia, South Asia. We have the case of China with relatively moderate to strong growth that we expected to continue. Case of India that has been also with a robust economic performance for several years now, above 6%. There are other countries in East Asia, the Philippines, Indonesia also that there are good, there are the bright spots, but there are many developing countries where growth, as I mentioned, is slow. Case of Brazil, case of Mexico, case of South Africa, many countries in Africa, and the message is very clear. Growth is insufficient, as we are observing, to improve labor markets conditions, to improve wages, to improve employment, and to reduce poverty. So this is an important implication of this economic situation in developing countries. What we observe, of course, in recent months, there is one aspect that is impacting very importantly the growth prospects is the policy uncertainty. The trade policy uncertainty is at historically high levels. We have seen the U.S. administration changing the policy decisions markedly and very radically in the last 3 months, which has created a lot of financial volatility and which is impacting, of course, the trade flows, the investment decisions, and the consumer sentiment and spending. And this is expected. I mean, this is having an impact, and we expect that this impact will continue to affect the global economy in the coming quarters and probably next year as well. One very important aspect related to this is the performance of investment. Investment has been subdued in recent years. We observe that the global investment was very low in 2024, and for many developing countries, this is very important. In Latin America, for example, you can see in the chart that the growth of gross fixed capital formation has slowed down in recent years. But also, if you see the average between 2010 2019 is close to zero. So that gives you a more structural kind of picture of the investment situation in Latin America and the implications that this have. And you could see investment in terms of gross fixed capital formation. You could see it in terms of investment in innovation, investment in R&D investment. Everything you see, especially in the developing countries of Africa and Latin America, and in some parts of Asia as well, has been relatively slow, which of course affects the short term, but also affects the capacity to growth in the medium term. And now, with all the trade uncertainty, with uncertainty on tariffs and the financial volatility, of course, a lot of firms are also in this type of wait and see attitude with a lot of the capital investment. So this is having a further effect on economic activity. One key aspect of recent years, since the pandemic and the war in Ukraine, is inflation. I think we have all feel inflation when we go to the groceries, when we pay our rent. In many countries of the world, inflation increased significantly. As you can see in these charts, 2022 and 23 marked a very steep increase in food inflation, in headline inflation, and the core inflation. The core inflation is the inflation that doesn't take into account the more volatile products like food and also the energy products. So the core inflation, as you can see, has also increased quite significantly. And very importantly, the food inflation, the prices of food products has increased quite a lot. Of course, in recent years, in 2024, and what we observe until now, halfway 2025, inflation has declined quite markedly, but there is still an affordability issue because of all the increase in recent years in inflation. It's not that prices are going down now. Prices already increased and are remaining quite high. So this affordability issue that we observe in housing, that we observe in gas, in food, is very much having a clear impact on living standard, and also I would like to mention on the political consequences in several countries as well. In some countries, like in Asia, in Western Asia and Africa, and also parts of Latin America, for example, in Brazil, food inflation also remains relatively high, above 6, also about 7%, which also affects the living standards of large population groups. Looking ahead on inflation, we are seeing that the risks are also increasing because of all the tariffs uncertainty, and also because of what we are observing related to climate change. We observe that the climate change impacts are increasing with more floods, with more disruption in supply chains, with the weather that is impacting the agricultural production. The prices of food are very likely going to be more volatile in the coming years, and that will certainly affect food prices as well. So it's a very important issue. Actually, we are currently working on this topic quite in depth, and for the next West report, we will have a very in-depth and more structural analysis of inflation in different regions of the world, particularly developing countries, and what governments can do to alleviate the impacts of inflation in most vulnerable groups. In terms of monetary policy, because of the lower inflation that we have observed in recent years, there is a global shift towards monetary easing. Central banks are cutting the interest rates, but because of what has been happening in the global economy in recent months and all the uncertainty, this continues now at a slower pace. So in this situation of high trade uncertainty is having an extra pressure on central banks that now has to balance the growth and the inflation trade-offs in a context that is very uncertain, and that creates a lot of challenges for central bank. However, having said that, we expect that this reduction on interest rates will continue in the short term. We see a space for further cuts of interest rate in many developing countries, so this is expected to continue. One key aspect that we highlight also in the report, and I cannot emphasize this enough, and I think it has been mentioned in the video that Ariel just showed, is about the fiscal challenges of many developing countries and the debt situation. In the last decade, we have observed a long-term and widespread increase in public debt. As you can see in the chart, The general government gross debt as a percentage of GDP has increased basically across all the regions, in developed economies, in Africa, in Latin America. So this has been quite a spread. Um, just to give you one number, by the end of last year, of 2024, the global public debt reached basically 95% of global GDP, which is, of course, very high. And in 8 of the world 10 largest economies, the government debt now surpass the 80% of GDP. So this, of course, has enormous consequences to the fiscal space, to the capacity of governments to invest in sustainable development, to invest in education, to invest in health, to invest in development. So and also to invest in resilience of economies to face shocks, to be prepared to be prepared for the economic shocks that will continue to happen. One indicator that we have been analyzing that shows this very clearly is the higher interest payments that countries are using to pay debt in many developing regions, and this is a phenomenon that applies mostly to developing regions. You can see that the government interest payment in developed economies in this chart has remained about 2 to 3% of the fiscal revenues on the left side of the chart. But in Africa, in South Asia particularly, and in Latin America and the Caribbean, you can see a quite remarkable increase in the government interest payment to pay that this country needs to pay to fulfill their obligation. And of course, this has, as I mentioned, enormous consequences because those resources needs to come from somewhere, and governments are facing enormous trade-offs to finance at the same time infrastructure investment and investment in health, education, etc. So to summarize a little bit, what are the major risks and policy challenges? On the monetary policy side, there are quite now, because of all the trade uncertainty and also because of what are going to be the impacts of this trade uncertainty on economic growth and on inflation, central banks are facing difficult trade-offs in terms of their policy decisions. So they are operating in very much uncharted territory. In terms of the fiscal policy, we observe that, and we highlight very clearly, that the debt challenges in developing countries may worsen even in the near future because of the lower growth prospects and also because of this higher trend in terms of paying for the interest, as I already show in the last slide. And in this context, the fiscal space in many countries is severely constrained, particularly in African countries and in many countries in Latin America, which also limits the capacity of governments to support economic activity. And in terms of international cooperation, I think we all agree also that multilateralism and international cooperation is not at its best moment right now. International cooperation is facing mounting risk in many fronts. And the policies that we are observing that many countries are implementing in terms of unilateral trade policies, export restriction, trade tariff, etc., undermine the multilateral trading system and also marginalize most vulnerable countries. So this, of course, has very important consequences, and there is an important need to a renewed global framework in many of these international cooperation aspects. And the Financing for Development conference in Seville, of course, was a step in that direction. Very quickly, I don't know how I'm doing with time, but very quickly to finalize, what does all this mean for sustainable development goals, all this economic picture? We see that in many developing countries and regions, particularly Africa and Latin America, there will be very limited improvement in labor markets in the short term, in terms of employment prospects, wage prospects, etc. What does this mean? Of course, that the levels of poverty and the rates of poverty will not improve significantly. We still have 800 million people living in extreme poverty around the world, which is, of course, very, very high. And we see global hunger and food insecurity also to remain persistently high, also in Africa and in parts of Latin America. Inequality seems to be a very structural issue that has not almost it's very hard to see improvements in countries. And I think from a political economy perspective, countries have not agreed yet what to do about it, if we should care about inequality or we shouldn't, and what type of policies should we implement in order to address that. Wealth taxes, more progressive tax system at the domestic level, that I don't see strong improvements in that area in the short term as well. In terms of, as I already mentioned, limited fiscal space and reduced investment for SDG, of course, that will continue in the short term, and I would say in the next couple of years. And finally, this crisis of multilateralism is having a particularly strong effect on most vulnerable countries. So that's why it's so important, and that's why the initiative, like the Financing for Development initiative and program, and is so important to move with that. That's what I wanted to share. Thank you very much, and looking forward for comments, questions, and whatever. Thank you, Ariel. Over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sebastian. Excellent presentation. I feel like I learned a lot myself. And thanks for that last slide on implications for the SDGs, because I can see that is touching on some of the questions we have here in Slido. But I think that the one that has the most votes here right now is, how can WESP help governments or institutions stress test their economic policies against different future trajectories? Is there a use case there in terms of how WESP can help governments stress test different kinds of economic policies against future trajectories?
Yes, of course. I mean, I would say there are two ways how this WESP report can help in that direction. I mean, first, the WESP provides an analysis of what is coming. We make forecasts of economic growth. We make forecasts of inflation at country level. So we provide, in that sense, what is our assessment of where the economies will go in the short term, and that clearly can provide some context, some background information, and some direction for policymakers in many countries to see where the economy is going, and knowing where the economy is going, of course, provide useful information in terms of what policies may be more relevant, where are the priorities, what should be the most important priorities when designing fiscal policies, when designing the fiscal budget, etc. And also from a more, not so much from a quantitative perspective, I would say also from more a qualitative perspective, in different WESP reports, we analyze what are the policies that are more relevant, more important in different aspects. Could be in investment, could be in innovation, could be in inflation, that countries needs to implement, and what are the caveats, what are the challenges, what are the risks of these policies, how these policies needs to be crafted, what are the potential outcomes, and what governments needs to be aware of in order to implement these policies in an effective way. Just as an example, last year we made an analysis of critical minerals, and we made an analysis of critical minerals from a policy perspective, from an industrial and innovation policy perspective, from a developing countries. So what are the policies that developing countries now, the Zambias, the Argentina, the Chiles, the Brazil, the South Africa, what policies, innovation and industrial policies these countries can implement in order to extract these critical minerals, but also to put value, to improve the value added, to create also business and local businesses, to increase employment. So also from a qualitative perspective, we try to make an effort in this report to analyze these policy options and what are the most important aspects that countries needs to take into account. Of course, policies in many dimensions, the critical minerals, for example, or the inflation, I mean the monetary policy, or for whatever, there is no one size fits all. There are specific circumstances that countries need to take into account, that the governments needs to take into account. So we don't provide recipes in that sense, but we provide also some recommendations. What are the risks? What are the challenges? What are the potential most important factors that governments need to take into account in the designing, in the implementation, and in the evaluation of these policies.
Yeah, thank you for that. Let's see. Maybe this is a little bit related, but how does WES help identify weak signals that can grow into major disruptions or opportunities over the coming decade?
Yeah, well, I mean, the critical minerals is another example of I would say of this. And when we chose topics that has potential opportunities for countries, for example, the critical mineral, where we see that countries can benefit from a development perspective, and we're trying to enter into, for example, this critical mineral, and try to analyze what are the potential benefits from for countries that wants to prioritize the extraction and refining of these critical minerals. What are the policies that can impact on that, and how countries can play in that direction? That's one example. But also, for example, in terms of the debt situation, we have been analyzing the debt situation of many developing countries for several years. We observed that many years ago, many countries were spending more and more resources in servicing their debt, in paying interest. And that can provide some highlights, some information for some countries that this is an important issue that if it's not addressed in the medium term could become a much more difficult issue to tackle. So in that sense, we take a short-term analysis, but also we tend to, or we want, and we make the effort to try to link to more medium-term trends that can identify risk, but at the same time to identify what policies needs to be taken into account to address these issues. I don't know if I answered very completely the question, but made an effort.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think we have time for just one more question. So let me take this one about how can this help countries facing protracted crises? Is there there are lessons to be learned from WES for countries in fragile or perhaps conflict-affected settings?
This is a very, very interesting question because I would say there is an enormous space for countries to learn from the experiences of other countries. Let me give you the example of inflation. As we know, inflation was a very prominent problem, and it still is in terms of affordability. A lot of countries, particularly in Europe, implemented very proactive fiscal policies related to contain these inflationary impacts on most vulnerable population. There was a variety of policies implemented. Some of them were quite new and quite innovative, I would say. So those policies can also be shared, and a lot of other countries that have not been implementing those policies can learn from those experiences, learn from the mistakes of other countries have been doing, learn from the good things that other countries have been done. So I'm saying this because we're currently working on this inflation issue this year, and we are paying particularly attention to what fiscal policies were implemented in different countries, developing countries, developed countries in Europe, to shield the most vulnerable population, and to provide income support, to provide price support, to the increase in oil, to the increase in food prices, and how that affected or not, how successful they were in shielding most vulnerable population. And there is a lot of lessons that countries that have not implemented those policies can learn for future shocks and future crises. And given the world we are living in, because of all the supply chain disruptions, the trade uncertainty, and the impacts of climate change that we observe more and more, the issue of inflation will likely remain among us for the foreseeable future. So I feel that in that area there is a lot of what countries can learn from each other, and we try a little bit in that sense to fill the gap, in terms of sharing those policies, and making our own analysis, and help countries that are in the middle of the process of designing these policies.
Great.
Thank you for the questions.
Yes, Sebastian, there's so much more to talk about, but
Oh,
we're going
yes.
to have to leave it here for now. Thank you so much for sharing this report with us and taking the time today. Also, big thanks to Thomas and Conrad for sharing their expertise with us today. We appreciate everything you guys are doing. And friends, that brings us to the end of this event. Many thanks for your participation with the polls and the questions. I learned a lot today. I hope you guys did too. And if you want to explore any of the social, economic, and environmental issues we talked about today, I note that DESA has a host of public resources, including these reports. We also have databases of SDG good practices, ocean commitments, etc. You'll find them all at un.org/DESA. I would also note that the next UN-DESA Global Policy Dialogue will be next Monday, the 21st of July. This one is on accelerating social progress to boost SDG implementation. That will happen on the sidelines of the high-level political forum on sustainable development in New York. That will be online in Zoom, and we will be putting the link in the chat box for you, and we hope you can join. And of course, this SDGs in Practice series continues next week with more sessions as well that you'll want to tune into. And many thanks once again to all our brilliant speakers and to you, our audience, for tuning in. Have a wonderful rest of the day or night, depending where you are in the world. Bye. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.